Okay, I think we can get started for good time. Hi everyone, I'm Christian Reiki. I'm a PhD candidate in comparative literature and the co-organizer for the Mesoamerican event series. This is Miroslava Guzman Perez, PhD candidate in Spanish and Portuguese, also co-organizer. Yeah, and today I have the privilege of presenting our speaker for today. But I just wanted to real quick give a shout out to our last two events of the semester. So we'll be having Abelardo de la Cruz, and now a scholar, on March 11th here in person, I think in Undone, all the way over there. And then sadly, our last event speakers couldn't get their visa appointments on time, so it's going to be a webinar. So we'll be having poets Martin Mello, who's from Guerrero, and then Maya Cachiquel, yes. So please save the date, come through, it's going to be great. But yeah, but today we have the honor of having Rita Palacios here. I'm gonna read out my phone so I have the bio. And then I'll give you the floor and we'll go through it, right? So she has been an important voice, right, for Mesoamerican studies, Maya studies, Central American studies, and Indigenous studies more broadly. You want a little bit more about her? She's a queer refugee settler and language professor in the School of Interdisciplinary Studies at Conestoga College, that's right, in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. Her work examines contemporary Maya literature and art from decolonial cultural and gender studies perspective. Her co-authored book, Unwriting Maya Literature, with Paul Worley, received an honorary mention for Best Book in the Humanities by the Mexico section of the Latin American Studies Association. For its groundbreaking approach to the study of Indigenous literatures from the Americas. This year she is on sabbatical and is currently at Massey College at the University of Toronto. Her current project is a proposal for Abya-Yala-specific Indigenous research methodologies in the humanities. So please help me in welcoming today Rita Palacios, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. It's very exciting for me to be here. It's so exciting to have a full house. Thank you all for coming. I want to thank Christian and Miroslava for organizing. I want to thank Clax, that's what I say. I want to thank Clax for giving us the space and the funding and all those good things. And you all for being here. Actually, before I begin, I'm going to acknowledge that we gather here today on the territory of the Kuchun, the ancestral lands of the Chochenyu, speaking Undone people, and ancestors and descendants of the Silver Verona band. I hope that today, through my words and my actions, I can honor the original inhabitants of this region. And because land acknowledgements have become such a great gesture, I think we often just include them, at least in Canada, that's what we tend to do, they're always there. I want to take it a little bit in a different direction, and I'm going to share with you an excerpt of a poem by an English professor in Canada. His name is Clint Burnham. And he wrote this poem called No Poems on Stolen Native Land, which is actually a 4-page poem and kind of makes fun of the acknowledgements. And I think it's just kind of a wake-up call for us. We'll go through it really quick, the excerpt, just because it's good. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on stolen land. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on borrowed land. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on overdue land. I'd like to acknowledge that we're in pickpocketed land. I'd like to acknowledge 50 pages of post-colonial bibliography. I'd like to acknowledge academic colonialism. I'd like to acknowledge activist colonialism. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on bureaucratic land. I'd like to acknowledge that poetic colonialism. And I'd like to acknowledge drinking a glass of water 2 minutes ago and not having to hold water first. The poem in its entirety is wonderful. So if you can find it, it's actually available. You can look it up, and it's the 4 pages are worth a good read. But it's just that jolt, right? Like they become so trite, and I think we have to really mean it. And I do mean it, and I hope today with my actions and the things that I'm doing today, I'm aiming more for an active acknowledgement rather than just, these gestures, these trite things. So to start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I'm going to do today. I'm going to start with a bit of a self-location, a bit of an exercise so you know who I am and why I'm here today, and to tell you what my responsibility being here today, talking to you what they are. I'm going to talk a little bit about this history, this nation, to try to start with not a blank slate because we can't do that, but start from a different place to start thinking about Mesoamérica, We're going to talk about the question of time, a little bit about space, time, and subject formation, the question of space, and finally we'll have some conclusions. There's time at the end, or if you want to know, I can talk about the first image that you saw, that rock. There's a wonderful story there. I just didn't know how to fit it back in, because I'm going to tell you a lot of stories. I'm a storyteller. So there'll be a lot of stories, but at the end, if you're curious and there are no questions, I'm happy to tell you about that story. Or you can write to me and I can tell you too. So, next slide. So, ¿quién soy? Who am I? Me llamo Rita Mercedes. I was named after my maternal grandmother. I was born in Guatemala City, which with my family, we fled when I was 8. And the reason for that was the raging civil war in Guatemala. We lived in Mexico for 5 years. And if you hear me speak Spanish, you'll hear an accent. It's actually kind of Mexican, not Guatemalan. That's the reason. I've been in Canada for about 30 years. I've lived in California, actually. I lived here for 3 years. But today I live in Kitchener, Ontario, which is located on the ancestral territories of the neutral Anishinaabe Haudenosaunee peoples. And the territory, so this is where I live. Here's Toronto, so if you ever want to come visit, that's where I am. It's about an hour. But this land was actually, the territory where I am, it was actually protected through a treaty. And the treaty, this is part of the treaty in the 1800s. It said 6 miles deep from each side of the river, beginning at Lake Erie and extending in depth proportional to the head of the said river, which them and their prosperity are to enjoy forever. So the treaty basically says this swath of land, which follows the Grand River, which is the largest, one of the largest waterways in Ontario. 6 miles on each side would be for Indigenous folks. That's what the treaty says. However, this is the only section that Indigenous folks actually control today. And it's the Six Nations people who are there. The rest of it is all for us settlers. So I bring that up because there's a lot of these treaties everywhere. You can just give it a click. So one of the things I encourage my students to do, I encourage you to do, is if you want to know where you're standing, if you want to know if there are any treaties, if you want to know what languages are spoken where you are, I encourage you to take a peek at the QR codes, or go to whose.land or native.land.ca, and then you can put in a GPS, like a Google map, your address, and it'll tell you where you are. And it's a neat way of learning where you are and being responsible for that. And I'm not saying you have to just use money or whatever. There are little things that you can do. And so that's my tip. So while I arrived in Canada as a refugee, I benefit from the settler systems in place, and that's why I identify myself as a refugee settler. It's not to say that it's been easy and straightforward, but I recognize the privileges that that I get as I move through a traditional Western education. And I'm sharing this with you because it's not just who I am as a person, but as a scholar, especially someone who works on Indigenous literatures. My interest in the field was sparked by distance and sort of a search for that faraway home. And I think a lot of us sort of find that. So reflecting on my position is something that I've learned from my fellow anthropology and gender studies colleagues. And this is something that we don't traditionally do in like straight up literary studies. We don't have this reflection, and I think we should. I think it's very important. And it's interesting because for Indigenous scholars, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks who study in Indigenous culture, this is kind of a requirement. Sean Wilson talks about this in his research ceremony. And the reason behind this, as I study this, it's become clear to me that it's not so much a methodological requirement, but or an academic nod, like I'm doing it, thank you, but it's a responsibility, right? Like, oh, gracias. Yeah, pardon. So critically creative self-reflection gives opportunity to examine our research purpose and motive. It creates neutrality with those who share their stories with us. Critically reflective self-location is a strategy to keep us aware of the power dynamic going back and forth between researcher and participant. It prompts awareness of the extractive tendency of research, and it endorses tending to the personal and cultural. This is very the personal and cultural, right? It's a very important feature. So following this, when Kovac talks about being accountable to our community, I want to ask us, right? Why do we do the research that we do, and why in that way? Whether it's in Indigenous literature or whatever it is that you're doing, why are you doing it in that way, and who's it affected? You need to ask these questions. For me, it was clear early on that most non-Indigenous Guatemalans continuously claim an indigeneity that does not belong. But particularly when everyday life is ruled by an anti-Indigenous life. This reflection has been possible because of my early exile. It's both sort of a curse and a luxury being so far away because I can think through these things. But it also means analyzing the privileges of my complicity. And well, bound to do better. I want to draw you to something, a really interesting thing that we do, and that is when we talk about Indigenous folks, about their work, or whatever it is, we usually try to identify. You say, well, what community do they belong to, right? Who? We do that. We don't think about it. We just do it. But my question is, what does that do? There's someone named Max Ligonovich. They're a meat settler scientist in Canada. And what they think is we have to be careful with that because we require that of non-white folks. We don't require it of Western folks, white folks. And so they say, doing this, we center settlers on whiteness as an exceptional norm, while deviations have to be marked and named. So we have to be really careful with this naming. So what happens if we require this marking, they call it marking, as they call it, of everyone, not just of Indigenous folks, right? So pointing out French, French Canadian, I don't know, English, right? Cachiquel. So what happens when we do that? Oh, that's just. And so this, they talk a little bit about this. I highly recommend this book. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Pollution's Colonialism. Wonderful book. The introduction is, I think the introduction is actually available for free. It's with Duke University Press. And they're a scientist and they talk about that, but that introduction is wonderful because it's a reflection of the Indigenous scientists and there's a lot of really interesting things, especially in methodology. I encourage you to do that. So this is a very long quote, and I apologize, but it's that notion that we have to think through about who we are. And I like this last line, and I'm just going to read this last line. Introducing yourself is part of an ethics and obligation, not punishment. With that, I've introduced myself. You know who I am and why I'm here and how, and hopefully you'll see how I do what I do. So from this point, I want to move to sort of the meaty part of the conversation because I think this is what we're here for, but I need to tell you about this. This is something I've been working on as well, this sort of positioning for methodology. I think it's very important. And I think if you're interested in these topics, you have to think about this. So you have to think about it. So, whose history and whose nation? So, to put us in the mood, I thought I would take you to Hidalgo, Mexico. This is a place I visited in 2022. And specifically, I was with an Indigenous community, a Ñujú community. And I want to tell you two stories. So, just two stories here that I'm hoping will set the scene and sort of help us begin that task of reconfiguring big concepts, right? To move us away from certain things, so that we can sort of abandon Western thought your Western thought for a minute and move on. And I'm not saying Western thought, your Western thought is wrong, but it can obscure other possibilities, right? Especially when we're talking about a place whose original inhabitants and their descendants don't necessarily ascribe to this particular line of thinking. So I will take you to Hidalgo, Mexico. I was there for about 4 weeks, and the Ñujú folks, they're better known, which is wrong because it's an imposed name, as Otomi. If you're wondering who are the Ñujú, they're Otomi. That's the Nahuatl name for them, but they see themselves as Ñujú, and they're often confused with Ñañu, but that's a different. They're family, but they're not Ñañu. They're Ñujú. So that's where I'm taking you. There's about 16,000 speakers of Ñujú in the area. And this that you see here, I put the Tenangos because this is, you know, if you've seen, if you look up Mexican embroidery, you'll see this, right? It comes from that area. And there's a story about how this came to be, but Anyway, I just wanted you to have that reference. This is El Sirio near Nesni, which is San Nicolas in Hidalgo. And it's a big monolith that you see here. You can't make it out, but there's a cross on the top. And it's sort of in the middle of a road. And people stop there and take a picture. And it's a very important sort of monolith for the New Who. And if you go over to this side, there's actually, it's a rancho, and it's private land, but they've luckily, they've been nice enough to let people still visit because there's a big wall and there's our petroglyphs. And the New Who folks that took me there, they wanted to show me the petroglyphs and make a connection to the Tenango figures. And that's important for many reasons, but just put a pin on it, we'll come back to that. And the petroglyphs there, I think the numbers I've seen is about 8,000 years old or so. They're very old, but these folks are making the connection. So, story number 1 takes place in Tuto Hidalgo. So when I was there, I was very lucky. I was invited by Ana San Agustin, who's a New Who woman, and she invited me to one of the costumbres. This particular costumbre is a peregrinaje or pilgrimage to the Santa Campana in Tuto. I don't know if you've heard of this Santa Campana. Ana is a New Who woman, and she had just finished her BA from the Universidad Intercultural del Estado de Hidalgo, and she actually wrote her entire thesis about this costumbre, and she let me read it, which was awesome. She was the madrina that year, which is a great honor, lots of responsibility, and this is the culmination of that event. So the Santa Campana is in here, and there are a bunch of aspects to this event, but the culminating one is the bell receiving a bath. She's given a bath, and she changes into new garments. Okay, the bell is a woman. She's a feminine entity, and she has a skirt, and she has the fondo, like the fustan. She has necklaces and earrings, a whole set, and every year it's changed. The Santa Campana is said to be one of 7, maybe 12, sister bells that were forged in colonial times. One of the sisters is none other than the big bell at the cathedral in Mexico City. Yeah. Another famous sister is said to be the bell rung by Hidalgo in Dolores to announce the Grito de Independencia. These are the stories. I was told that the bells were forged using the same materials and techniques, and that they all communicate. They all know where they are. But it's funny because you don't hear about the other bells. And when I asked, they're like, well, they're here. Some of them are buried. Sometimes you can hear them. They talk to each other. They're sisters. They get along. It's great. So that was the story of the bell. Fabulous story. Story number 2. You don't have to go there. When I was in Tuto, I was told about Mexico Chiquito. I don't know if you've heard about Mexico Chiquito. Mexico Chiquito, okay? This is another sacred place where there's an important pilgrimage every single year. Mexico Chiquito is also known as Mayonija and has been around for about 7,000 years. And the site, and people visit them. But I asked, why Mexico Chiquito? Like, I couldn't understand that. I don't know that it's because this is one of the places that when the eagle was looking for a place to land, it actually came here. But people got out and they scared off the eagle, so they go like, I'm out, went to Texcoco. The other story, there's a couple of versions. The other version says that the eagle showed up, and when it tried to extend its wings because it was so large, it didn't fit. Like, I need a better place, so it left and went to find a nopal, and then the rest is history. The Tenochtitlan was found. So that's the story of Mexico Chiquito. So Jacques Galinier, I think some of you may know, very famous anthropologist who works in that area, talks about this story. He says, en el relato, este pueblo sería el primer punto donde se detuvo el águila sobre el nopal, mucho antes de que ésta se cruzara en las orillas del lago que se extendía en el corazón de la punta del Valle de México. Recordemos que cada pueblo otomí es un centro del universo. And this is a very important idea, this center of the universe. We're going to come back to this. Reproducción de otros centros ceremoniales, otros centros super importantes, como el Cerro de la Comunidad y obviamente Mayoní. No es pues sorprendente que este lugar sea considerado una especie de punto focal mítico una réplica de la capital de la nación mexicana. Okay? I'm really interested in this last slide. This idea of a sort of mythical focal point, a reproduction of the capital of the Mexican nation. Okay? This story, we can interpret it really easily, following Galinier, right? Thinking, understanding the Campana's kinship and the Eagle's first landing as attempts by the Nuhu people to participate in the nation and its founding stories. Right? So this is a very bad timeline, don't measure anything, it's poorly done, but I just wanted to give you the visual, right? So we can think of the Nuhu people as wanting to insert themselves, right? That's an easy interpretation. But I ask you, can we do something different? Right? What happens if it's not the Nuhu people wanting to be part of two key moments in the formation of the great Mexican nation, but rather, what if they're actually not inserting themselves, but inviting Mexicans to be part of their history? And so I did this timeline. So I took 4,000 before our current era, which is Mayonija. We know there's actually, archaeologists have told us it's 4,000 BCE. That's when Mayonija, how old Mayonija is. This is year 0, our current era. This is today. This is the Mexican nation. So for the Nuhu, there's a much longer history. I don't think they're asking Mexicans to participate in their story. I think they're inviting Mexicans to be part of their story. This is how I'm interpreting this, and it makes me feel really small. I mean, I don't know about you, but when you look at the Mexican nation, and I'm giving Mexico, I started at like year 1,000. All right, let's give us a couple more years, right? Not with Tenochtitlan, but like, I mean, really, still very tiny, right? So when we have this, what does this say? Like, what are we doing? So when we frame these stories differently, like the result of the story different. So this Nuhu timeline shows that the Mexican nation is but a small period in the history of their people. They can and do trace their origins much farther back, right? 6,000 years before our current era, in fact. So we can actually take it 2,000 if we're looking at the Sirio. Remember I showed you the mound with the petroglyphs in the back? So if we actually would add 2,000 years to it. Right? So it's much longer. So their historical memory is much longer than the Mexican states. And I think that's food for thought. So when we decenter ourselves, right, and lose that hold of your Western thought that we privilege over and over again, we're confronted with the insufficiency of our tools and approaches. When we apply certain terms, we talk about peoples who have inhabited these lands for thousands of years, they fall short, particularly when these terms are so loaded and imposed. There's a sort of violence that takes place when the term is created, agreed upon by experts, and applied without consulting the people who it concerns. When we talk about Mesoamérica, we're deploying an analytical tool of anthropology and archaeology that has been adopted by other disciplines to identify the region and in many ways negates the possibility of agency. The Greek prefix meso implies an in-betweenness, right? In this particular case, a location between north and south, where without these 2 points of reference, there'd be no middle, right? But it's also been used in geology, right? When we talk about Mesozoic era with dinosaurs, and archaeology, Mesolithic, Stone Age, to indicate a temporality that is well fixed in the past. There's sort of a sense of the inescapable here, of being stuck, a sort of temporal spatial stativity. I don't dispute for a moment that the term's used. I'm used to myself. I use it myself. And that it has sort of outgrown that initial use as a scientific instrument. And it's become widely used, recognized, and even written into our own regional DNA. What I want to know is, has it limited our capacity to think beyond the parameters that it sets for us? In the middle of the Americas, with the insistence of the past, what if we break away from it and think through other options? So something funny happened when I was working on this presentation. I was thinking about Mesoamérica and these alternatives, and I don't know what I want to propose. And something popped up on my social media, and I love this. This is a call for papers done by activists in the region. And they call this Mesoamérica, which is fabulous. And this, what you see here, this text here, a call for papers for narrative action for Indigenous people, Afro-descendants, and diverse communities in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, and their diasporas. This is, I translated this from the website. If you want to miss the website, it's hackeocultural.org. You can go check it out. But I thought, hey, here's an alternative. And it just kind of appeared on my social media. And I thought it was super cool. And it has something that I really, really like, which is the idea of the milpa. The milpa is the traditional cornfield for Mayas. And we're going to come back to, I'm going to talk about the milpa a whole lot, actually. But it has that notion in there, right? And it marries it with America, which, you know, of course it has its problems. But it's super cool that this is coming from the region, by people of the region, and it's quite awesome. I mean, if you ask me, I really like it. Like I like the sound of milpa. But yeah, I wanted to share that with you. And like I said, we're gonna come back to the milpa and do visit the website if you can. And if you have friends who are interested, please send them that way. I think it'd be great. So when I talk about Maya time, I usually rely on visual art, specifically the work of the Pollon brothers. And in this case, it's Dante Pollon. This is the image that you see here. I use their work a lot because I feel like it lends a body to some of these very complex ideas. And so that's what I have here. But one of the quotes I included here is from an Aki. It's a Maya daykeeper. And he's talking specifically about the calendar and counting days. And he says, as you begin to understand the days, he explains, their meanings clarify, deepen, and broaden. Like a giant spiral, like a dynamic weaving. They will fall like petals of a flower. And this is Roberto Pos, and he's quoted in My Spirituality by Molisky Pos, which is this. So one of the things I want to point out here is usually when Maya time is mentioned, for whatever reason, people think it's circular. And that circularity implies repetition, and that's not it. And I don't know if it's because the big, long calendar is round and people just circle. Not quite. It's too one-dimensional. Cyclical, I think that's more accurate, but not in the sense, again, that it's repeating. In the sense that it has cycles or periods of time, just like we have, summer, spring, winter. They're never the same, but we have the cycles, right? It's more like that. I think a better way to understand it, it's this idea of the spiral, almost like a helix, right? I think that's a better way of understanding it. It's very dynamic. It has sort of feedback loops. And the past, present, and future are in constant communication. We're going to get into that in a second. And the best part, I think, is that people move through it and they're aware of it and it's embodied. Yeah, we're gonna get to it in a second. So this piece here, I want to talk about this piece. It's called De vez en cuando camino al revés. Once in a while, I walk backwards. This is a piece inspired by Humberto Cabal poem. It shows two leather shoes that you can see here. They're covered in mud. They're approximately 50 centimeters apart. And I know this because I've been measured them for me. I asked him, I'm like, okay, how far apart are they? He's like, he measured. So they're about 50 centimeters apart. What is that, like 2 feet? 3? 2 feet. That's approximately how far apart they are. And they are joined together by a rubber band that acts like a shoelace, right? And the neat thing about this is that the rubber band creates this sort of tension. Okay, the rubber band has this tension. It's taut. It's not loose. It's taut. And that tension, it's this notion of time. Each shoe, you have the past and the future. And that tension, I was going to say the middle, but it's not the middle. That tension is the present. The best part, or not the best part, but one of the best parts is that we don't know which one's past and which one's future. We don't know. We have no idea, right? It depends where you're standing, I guess. We don't really know. But the tension is there, and that's what's so important. And the idea of movement, tension implies movement, right? There's something happening. So that's what we have here. So from here, I want to move quickly to Acabal's poem. Roberto Cabal is a Quiche poet. He's probably one of the best indigenous poets from Guatemala that we know. His work is absolutely gorgeous. He's been translated in like 20 languages, including Japanese and Scots. He died in 2019, unfortunately, but he left us so many poems. And this is the poem that inspired Anka's work. And it's called Camino al Revés. De vez en cuando camino al revés. Es mi modo de recordar. Si caminara solo hacia adelante, te podría contar cómo es el. Beautiful poem. And this poem, again, touches on time. It's that notion that you're in movement. But also memory, and memory has to do with time. One of the things I like about this poem is that we see that the poetic voice is walking, not just looking back. It's not just a glance over my shoulder and say, oh, that's what I did. I'm just thinking, there's an actual movement, right? Remembering requires movement in this case. And then other neat thing is that it implies that the movement cannot happen only in one direction, just forward. We're oriented toward the future, but it would mean forgetting or losing the past, right? It suggests that we need both. We need both. The backward and forward movement, right? To create that tension and have a present. You need both. You can't move on. So we have memory here as a dynamic process that keeps records in a way. And there's that idea of honoring the past, right? But also challenges that notion of progress, right? We need to move forward, we can't look back, and introduces the Maya concept of memory again, like I said, but also the possibility of the multiplicity and simultaneity of time, past, present, and future, all happening at the same time. And here I want to tell you another story. Again, I'm a storyteller, and I just thought of this last night, so I'm like, oh, I gotta do this. A couple of years ago, I was chatting with a PhD student in Palacios, and she had collected she had interviewed Kachi women, so she had all these testimonies of the Kachi women, and she was having trouble going through it. She said to me, I can't find, that it's like the women are telling stories, but they feel very disordered, right? Like they're one day talking about the mine. There was mining project in Guatemala, and then all of a sudden they're moving way back to the great grandparents, and all of a sudden they're back to like last year when the government did this, and then they're jumping back. Anyway, it felt like it was very disordered, and I said, like it's not. You're looking for a linear sort of story, but what you're getting is sort of this. You're getting that helix. You're getting these women understand that their present is very much related to the past, right? It's not broken. They understand that this mining project is related to colonialism. It's related to capitalism. It's all related. They have a much longer memory than we do, right? And they see it like this. It's not like this. It's like this. It's constantly moving, and they're able to move back and forth, which is, we study this, right? Like we go to school and we learn to talk about the past, but these women live it and they do it, and it's fantastic, and so that really helped her. But I think it's a really fantastic way of trying to understand time, and also it says a lot about very short memories in the West, and I immediately think of in Canada. Too many people, when you bring up residential schools, they're like, past, on. And I've heard the same thing when people talk about here. I know there's been like, in the South especially, people who go to old plantations and they want to have photos, and they don't want to hear the history because it's ugly. They just want a pretty picture, right? Because that historical memory is so short, and we don't encourage a long-term memory. Right. So I think this is a different way of looking at things. Okay. So we'll move really quickly to space, time, and a bit of subject formation. This is a piece by Fernando Pollón, and it's Retorno al Sol. It's a sort of a school book, a school grade book. And he's done the planas. I don't know if you did that when you were a kid. You're repeating letters, right? Like you have to improve your writing. Well, Fernando takes the crosstalk and he creates a sort of grammar with this. It's a phenomenal piece. But I want to talk about this piece, which is a Paso de las Nubes, at the Pace of Clouds, which is a gorgeous piece. And I want to relate it to Chole. And this is a concept that Paul Burley and I talk about in our book and I'm writing my literature. The Chole, and we use it to analyze some of the things that are happening in some of the Maya literature that we look at. But the Chole, so the Maya cornfield, is where all knowledge is acquired in the cosmos, and it's woven together. In this act, the past and the present are imbricated, and from it one can visualize the future. Right? And I think that's a beautiful thing about la milpa, right? The cornfield. This is where you really see that tension of present, past, and future. This is where you see it in action, and I think it's a perfect sort of place. Because in the cornfield is where you have folks going, right? It's the ancestral land. They're using ancestral methods. They're using probably tools that, I don't know, their grandparents used or from last year. They're using the seeds that they have saved. They're planting, they're doing that, preparing that land in this present, and they're doing it for a future, for eating later, right? For selling it, for having more seeds later. But it's also thinking about a longer future. Right, and in Indigenous folks, you kind of think about 7 generations, we're thinking that far ahead. And Indigenous folks, Maya folks are thinking about too, right? Like not just my children, my children's children. Like this goes much farther than that. But what I want you to think is this is all happening simultaneously, right? That's the cool thing. It's happening at that moment. Preparing the land using those old traditions, ceremonies. Doing it at this moment for a future. Perfect place to sort of see that conception. And this piece by Fernando Puyon, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a cornstalk. It's a beautiful, proud, tall cornstalk. But if you get close, it's actually pencils. I don't know if you can see the pencils. And if you're a stationary nerd, these are just HBs of number 2 pencils. Right, which is the most common pencil. That is that relationship of knowledge, right? That idea that in the cornfield you're acquiring knowledge. That's your school. This is where you go educate yourself. This is where you go be. And I want to relate this, if I can give you a click, to Manuel Bolon, who writes about Manuel Bolon Pale, because there's another Manuel Bolon in Guatemala who's catchy. Manuel Bolon Pale is Tzotzil, and he writes Canel, Funciones y Representaciones Sociales en Mixtán, Chiapas, and he talks about this really interesting concept of becoming a subject, becoming someone, and he talks about 3 different stages, and the first one is you know, as a person, a very personal stage, well, the interpersonal. So you become a whole person. Then you move on. If you achieve that, you then aim for sort of an interpersonal relationship with others, right? So once you're formed as a subject, then you can be with your family, become a part of that community, maybe a little bit farther out, the larger community, not just your family. And then that takes you to the extrapersonal, which is the community at large. Then you can move out of your community and go and represent your own community. Right now that you become a fuller sort of version of yourself. And I think in many ways this happens in the cornfield as well, right? But the best part about this is that it's a necklace, right? And he says, el canel conduce a una mejor convivencia social. Siempre debe estar orientada a cuidar, proteger y desarrollar la vida de mejor manera posible para que nos conduzca a la buena comunicación y a la convivencia social. Beautiful concept about how to live life and how to be in community. And again, this is a concept that Paul and I talk about in writing Maya literature, if you want to read more. But you can also get Manuel's book. It's beautiful. So in the milpa, this is a space where, in the milpa, where space and time meet, we have the formation of Maya individuals and community members who keenly aware of a past, present, and future, and the movement to and fro that is time. So this next question is of space. And when we talk about space, we're talking about territory, right? We have to talk about territory. The place where, Maya people live, eat, and work is part of who they are. And I think it can be best understood by this image. This is an image by Manuel Chavajay. It's a piece, and he's Sutuki. This was shown at the National Art Gallery in Canada. That's where I saw it. And this pattern that you see here, it's the pattern of the Tsutuhil people who live around the lake at Atitlan. And what you see on top of it is an oar. And when you approach this piece, and the way it's usually shown is you walk in and it's in front of you. So when you see it, all you see is textile. That's it. You just see the textile. But when you start approaching and maybe taking a bit of an angle, you start making out the oar. And it's a beautiful commentary on being Sutuhil, but having the oar that represents you and ties you to that place, the lake, not land in this case, but the lake, and making that connection, right? We are ore, we are textile, we are this design. Right. So I thought it was a beautiful sort of commentary on that, especially if you know anything about weavings and in relation to Maya people, each community has their own type of weaving. Right? And this is the one for the Sutuhil people. The lake, I'm gonna come back to the lake Atitlan, so put a pin on that one. Keep bringing you back to things. You can do all sorts of things, but Maya people around the lake, and it's not just the Tuquiles, there's also Cachiqueles. They'll have a boat, and that's how they get around. But anyway, I think it's a fantastic sort of commentary about cultural identity, right? How Mayas are tied to the land, or in this case, the. So to talk about space, I want to bring you to this concept, and this is a concept. It's actually a design. It's a weaving design, and Paul and I wrote a paper for a book of Central American literatures as world literatures, and in it we were asking ourselves, how do you bring Maya literature to the forefront and sort of do away with that idea of hierarchies and canons, and just think of like, this literature has as much of a place as any other literature, and rather than having those hierarchies, can we have a multi-centered view? And so we thought through that, and I thought it was really appropriate for our discussion today. So this design I thought was really appropriate. It comes from, it's a very ancient design, it's about 1400 years old. We see it in this lintel, which is the Dashilan Lintel 24, which is the British Museum. We talked about the British Museum earlier. And you see Lady Shock here, and she's wearing a wipil. And that wipil, you see in the close-up, has this design, the Shokombalumil design. And the Shokombalumil design is the design of the universe. This is the universe. And it's a graphic representation of a polycentric understanding of the world. Not so much a centralist world, but filled with the possibility of infinite moving centers. Super cool. So with this, I think that the neat thing about Shokombalumi is that it's going to give us an alternative to the hierarchical spatial orientations of north-south that we're so used to. And think of those multiple centers that exist and interact in literally a horizontal plane, but also in a just sort of more equal plane, right? Where everything's more level, rather than these hierarchies that we're so used to. So maybe you click. So this is the design, and we've outlined it. We used this with Paul before, but we sort of did this so you could see what it means. But basically, the diamonds along the vertical axis, so these two, are tied to the central line, and these signify east and west. Okay, so I'm shifting you completely because you probably walk around thinking, right? But here I have east and west. The diamonds on the side, so these two, represent north and south, and are not connected to the middle, right? This is Shokombalumi. There's no connection. One of the very cool things, and we're coming back to the lake in a second. So the east-west orientation is looking at the sun's movement. So we're basing this on the sun's movement. Many people have thought of this for a long time, sun's movement, and it's something that we're on this planet, we know it. So we all have this. This is a universal difference. But another thing that's neat, while Mayan languages have east-west, those notions exist in Mayan languages to refer to the movement of the sun, and this is by Barbara Tadlock. No specific equivalent terms for both north and south have been registered in dictionaries for half of all Mayan languages. So half of Mayan languages don't have north and south. Get better. When referring to north and south, it's actually place specific because they may note something like regional weather phenomena or topography. Okay? And this is from Barbara Tadlock. For the Cachiquel people of the lake, so we're going back to Lake Atitlán, Xocomil denotes both the notion of south as well as the dangerous afternoon winds that come from that direction and make passage of the lake difficult. So for the Cachiqueles there, they have a word for south, but it has to do with regional phenomena. So they can't go to Chichot, where Fer and Uncle are, and say Xocomil because they don't have that reference, right? So this conception of placeness in the world provides a sense of universality, right? The trajectory of the sun, while at the same time integrating a sense of locality or specificity, right? The regional weather phenomena. As a concept of map, we cannot reduce this to world or globe, right? We can't. It's not just a globe, because these are sort of totalizing ideas, right? Hierarchical, singular, and really centric. Here, the center is process and movement. And if we keep in mind that east and west, right, this is defined by the setting sun, by the rising and setting sun, it's not fixed. That's the other thing, it's not fixed, but changes over the course of the year. So we have a single depiction of infinite centers all at once, a 2D representation of infinite 4D space. But even this infinite representation itself is not meant to be singular. It exists in relation to other cosmos. And here, this is just a capture of a weaving, but this is actually, and I'll show you after, it's a bunch of these Xocomalumiles. There's a bunch of them. In any one textile, you won't just get one. There's always a bunch. So one of the reasons it's so important is because indigenous peoples, and this is Stefano Varese, indigenous peoples have familiarly built cosmocentric and polycentric cosmologies based on logics of diversity and reciprocity. This is a diverse cosmos in which there's no privileged center nor hegemonic center. Horizontal. Very, very horizontal. So, I wanted to show you this because it's a really cool take on this. This is Rosa Chavez. She's a very important indigenous Maya, Quiche, Cachiquel poet from Guatemala. She's just won, I don't know, some really important prize. And she's a fantastic person. So she writes poetry, but she also does a lot. She does a lot of things beyond poetry, and I find that a lot of Maya writers actually extend beyond the page. And I mean, this is what we talk about in writing biography. It's not contained in the page; it goes way beyond. And this is Rosa in 2017. She has a poem called "Somos la voz que recupera su canto." We're the voice that recuperates their song. And she goes to Guatemala City. I'm only going to show you 2 minutes. It's 17 minutes long. I was not going to do that to you, but you can go check it out on your own. And she shows up. She says, "Somos la voz que recupera su canto." She says it a number of times. Then she takes out from her bag and takes out those whistles, those clay whistles that are so common. You grew up in Guatemala, you know what I'm talking about. And she places them around her, right? She's creating these little worlds around her. And she starts playing. And people are not, they don't participate. And someone in the audience, it's actually her partner, he comes out, Peko comes out, and he grabs one and starts playing it. There's other instruments as well. And eventually people start feeling brave enough to be part of this symphony. And they become their own smells in here. And so then you have this beautiful symphony of very loud noises. The best part is you hear birds too. Birds are like, oh, we'll partake. If I can hear your part. I sort of love that it's the kids who are really brave. Like they're the ones who, no preconceptions. They're just like, I can be part of this. Why not? What's stopping me? Um, so, so, um, so basically, this is what the textile looks like, right? Christina, pues mucho como reading. And it's basically this idea, un mundo donde quepan muchos mundos, right? A world of many, many space. I think just to quote them, this is sort of open bunch of closing statements. Because I do wanna hear what you have to say, and because I think these are things that I'm also thinking through. But I think what we need when we're thinking about how do we come up with a concept, or how do we better think of these things, we need a longer historical memory, I think, that is localized, they're rooted in the territory. I think we need it, there's no question. I showed you that. I don't know. I really want to hear what you thought about the timeline I showed, the new timeline, but I think we need something more. We also need to do away with hierarchies. I think that's gotten us into so much trouble. We need to decenter, move away from the notion that the West is best. We've privileged that for very long. And it's not to say that there are not good things about it. It's just that there are also other things that we should be looking at. And unfortunately, the way Eurocentrism works, it's designed to discard everything else. So it's by design. So we have to make an effort to step out, I think. And And then we need a more just and humane model, right? And I think this model that brings many centers is that model. And when I say human, and this is really important, and this is something that we just wrote a paper with Paul about our place in Hispanic studies, and I can tell you more about that. But one of the things that and this was Paul, he said to me, when we think of human, we think humans. But for many indigenous people, Maya people, humanity actually also includes animals and plants, right? We keep coming up with new trends in literary studies and other studies, right? And we want to include animals and what is it, beyond human, or indigenous people kind of living things like thousands of years ago, just kind of coming late to the party. But I think that's what we need, right? These also include non-sentient beings, these versions of humanity. And I think we need to look there too. So I think I'm gonna, oh, look at that, wow. I'm gonna stop there. You ask me if you wanna know about that first rock, you ask me about that, I'm happy to talk about it. Or anything else, thank you so much for listening and welcome.
Hi everyone, so this is the Q&A section, so please feel free to ask any questions right now, we still have some time. And please ask questions, anything, comments, suggestions, etc. So I'm gonna open it up now.
I love your presentation. Me encantó todas sus investigaciones que pienso es súper importantísimo. I'm Javier Armas. I teach Chicano history at Oakland Tech High School down the street. And the biggest newcomer group in Oakland and San Francisco are Guatemaltecos Mayan Mom from the Western Mountains bordering Chiapas. And with some of my students, we wrote a book on the history of the Mayan Mom language. And for your presentation, I've a lot of comments, a lot of questions, but just to kind of cut to the chase, maybe the most important ones. I would be really interested in hearing what you have to say about the Mayan calendars, the Zolkin, the long count, what role that plays with your understandings of time, and also the Mayan zero and how the calendrical structure was tied to the Mayan zero, which made the Mayan calendars more precise as far as measuring time compared to our Gregorian calendar.
That's an excellent question. I don't work on calendars. I should, but it's not, I don't feel confident in giving you an answer. Wrong. I mean, the nice thing about the Maya calendar is that it's as present as it was, 2,000 years ago, right? It's there. People still use it. I'm doing Kachiga classes, and every time we start a class, my teacher brings up, today is this day, right? So there's that notion, it's very present. I think it's so important to honor that as well, right? And I mean, and I think the neat thing is with the Maya calendar and how it's still so present, it doesn't align with the Gregorian calendar at all, right? And like you said, it's way more accurate. So it's really, I really value when people bring it up, because it's just, we're so tied to our own calendars, which are so flawed. Right? You gotta add a day here every 4 years, right? But yeah, I'm sorry, I can't give you an answer. I don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, no, we appreciate all the research. See you.
Thank you so much. I have a question about the reading pattern. The mundo. Some of the diseños are very familiar, right? Even in in Oaxaca, they have the Greca, right? The Capoliti. And I was just curious about if you had any information about kind of the direction of the weaving of the Greca.
Okay, so this one is not Greca. This is actually the design, right? Like it's not considered a part of a Greca.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
It looks like it's a butterfly design.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but I know what you're saying. I think, yeah, the Greca is something else. In this case, it is Chocomalumi, right? It is, and sometimes it's isolated, like they'll take out some parts and they isolate it. I think in the article we published, or the paper in that book, it's isolated, it's just the center. It's just this. Sometimes it's isolated, but in this case, it's Chocomalumi, like it's not separate. And the funny thing is, this multi-centered view, many places view it the same way. This is Chocomalumi for Potosí folks. If you go Guatemala, it has a different.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much. And so you're saying this is a universe,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
With many centers.
Yeah.
But then it's also butterfly, you also said.
Yes, it's also butterfly, because it's good, it's the flight of the butterfly bringing, the night to the day.
Okay,
There's the sea.
thank you.
And that you can find a little bit more in a writing my literature, we actually have a discussion.
Thank you so much.
In these moments in which there is so much migration, like in Guatemala, or in the United States, other places, how it is placed in the contemporary Maya literature that trans-territorialism and perception.
There's a lot of, yeah, that's a great question. There's a poet, Ana Gabriel Chiquin, no, it's not Ana Gabriel. Gabriel Chiquin, she was here in California for a number of years. And it was right during the war, and she had to escape, and her brother was murdered, and very, very sad experience, and she talks about that, like that pain of leaving, right? And so that her specific book is from a personal experience. Other poets think about that movement away, and they also reflect on that. Like it's almost a painful break. That's how they see that migration. Angelica Serech, she's a textile artist. She actually made. She has a big piece. This is a woman from also Chichot. She works with like massive needles, and one of the things she does is she, like when you see this, it's small. It's always small. She has one called El Dorso de mi Huipil, and it's brought to time the size of this ring. Absolutely massive. But she has these reflections, and she has one piece that's called the Viaje de Ivo. Ivo was her father, and so in that piece, she's thinking about what happens when someone has to come to the U.S. to make money to send money home. And so there's a lot of pain in there too. And in that piece, she has it's beautiful because it's done in brown. It's the color of Comanapa, the traditional color. And she's woven flags. There's like Panama, Guatemala, El Salvador. She's woven them in the same color. She just added some white here and there, and it kind of gets lost. And it's this notion of the territory sort of being kind of moving with the person, if that makes sense. So I think there's a sense of that. There's a sense of loss, of deep loss that comes with that. I haven't studied it precisely, but I have noticed it. Yeah.
So I want to hear more about your conception of like Mesoamerica or what you want to do differently. I mean, like we have Amish, right? Like corn, and you hinted at it with the Mesoamérica. So I think you're going somewhere with that. So I want to hear more of what you're kind of doing.
Or with it. I'm actually giving it to you guys to figure it out. I think that's for homework. Mesoamérica's not mine, right? Like that, those folks came up with it. I think I'm issuing a challenge for us to think different. I think it's funny when I have a good friend who works on she's Kuna and she works on Ariel and how we've taken that word and it's Kuna and she's like, you guys are all using it. You don't know what I mean. It actually means blood. And you know she's like, why don't you use your own words? She's like, every community has their own words. They can use their own word. And I think there's something there, right? Like every community has a way to refer to themselves, like the news, like the news, right? So I think there's something there. I think maybe we don't need our words for this entirety. I don't know. I actually don't have solutions. I have questions, and I have challenges for you all. I know it's a one step for philologists. It's a wonderful instrument. Mesoamérica. We say it. We know. We visualize that map I showed you, right? You know where it is. What if we don't have that a bad thing? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
We'll go here, and then Lucina.
All right, thank you for your illuminating talk. I was intrigued by your mention at the end of the blind view of non-human animals and plants as people, and I was hoping you could elaborate on that a bit.
If you can look at the Popol Vuh, they talk about humans in there, and humans are everywhere, right? Not just people. It's everywhere. It's also animals. It's also plants. Trying to think. There's also what I mean, if you look at poetry, you'll also find in some of the poetry, Enigma Floyd, who's coming, she talks about her brothers and sisters, their plants, their animals, you know, their brothers and sisters are also human, right? They extend beyond us.
How did that translate into like cultural practices?
Well, there's a respect for all living things for them, right? There's a respect for all living things. There's an acknowledgement that they have other ways of understanding things, not just us. And I think this goes for a lot of Indigenous cultures, that they also, you can learn from them certain things. And I mean, look at biology, right? You see, and then you look at how an animal has adapted, right? That's sort of our historical, like a record, a memory, and that's how Indigenous folks too, right? I think, and they will tell you, these animals have lessons, right? And there are a lot of myths, you know, called them myths or stories, like stories. There are a lot of stories, and there's lessons in there, and I think that's what, you know, it's a different language.
And perhaps it's related to the Nahuales and the Sanushes, you know, who are these trans. Beyond the human, but not necessarily animals and part of it.
Rosa Chavez has a phenomenal poem about her Nahual and becoming, she calls it an animal. She transforms it. I wish I had it with me.
So to do a follow-up, I was wondering if that flourished into any like feeling that they should be protected or not consumed.
No. I think there's an understanding that we need each other to survive and then consume you. There's an understanding that you don't exploit the consumption, right? Like you can't, and it goes for plants and animals. If you overdo it with one of them, it's not good, and you have to be respectful. And there are, you know, you think every time you're gonna eat an animal, you think that animal, you treat it with respect. And I think, I mean, this should go for us too, like everyone, I think should do that, because you're taking a lot. Yeah, no, I don't, you know, and yeah. So I can go on and on, but yes.
We'll go here, then Lucy.
Okay, so I'm like noticing this world of many worlds, and what I'm like really noticing is how predominant the white is. Does that have any like significance, or like is that
It could be any color.
okay?
In this case, the Weaver chose red. And some communities like have preferences.
Right.
For colors. There's if you and again, this is something you worked on with Paul. If you look at a writing, sorry, I keep. But if you in our writing, we talk about this design and how women worked. And it's very cool because you have women wearing this and moving around in the world. Like they're all in centers, so you have like multiple centers moving, right, with women wearing this design, which is it's such a cool idea. And in my thinking, humans are their own cosmos, right? With the number 20, right? The fingers on the toes. So it is more of a cosmos, which is when you all go out. That's why I love that performance by Rosa. Right? I mean, it's chaotic and loud, but it's very cool because you see this, right? We're all a center, and I think it's the way I interpret it. I mean, if I had to write a paper, it's this notion that you know, it takes some courage to step into that and be that center, because we're so used to having those hierarchies and expecting someone to tell us, okay, you can come in and grab all the stuff. Right? And the way she does it, she just starts and then people just don't feel comfortable. And the way I interpret it is that, like, we're so afraid of stepping into ourselves as centers. Right? And I'm not saying let's be all egocentric from but coming into it, like maybe like Manuel says. 44 is an individual who's willing to represent themselves, their community, a family, right? With all those responsibilities, then you can be that center. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk, and my question is gonna be like all over the place, so.
That's
I don't know if there's gonna be like a question, but like, since you were talking about like this last piece, I was like, first like wondering if you know like who the audience was. So, because I'm very curious about that, about like not stepping in. That in a certain way, it's very much like how we are, I don't know, how art or some pieces like actually work, right? If you think about the most like, I don't know, in their time, like participatory forms. I don't remember the artist now, but I went to see the show and it was like everything was like como vallado. So you could see how like, so in a certain way, like how I think my question would be like or the idea of like diseño, I think that like the notion comes like from the notion of like genio, right? That's like in the Italian like version, that means like uniqueness or like being like with like hierarchical, like more like como una talento, como artístico, como especial. So in a certain way, I was thinking that like this like the people watching not like coming in, right, would at least like I know very little, but some like weaving, for instance, is like, okay, there is no like I can do it, and like we everybody, it's like a social like practice. So I was wondering, since you work a lot with artists, like how they navigate this idea of like I don't know, like a different um not like a sphere, let's say, or how it interconnected it's with others. I don't know if like it makes sense, because like what I'm like trying like to ask in a certain way basically has to do with like how art is understood, right? And yeah, how these practices that are either in dialogue or trying to give voice, or like talk about the voice, are connected to things where things work differently, let's say.
Well, okay. So the piece was actually done at the end of a festival. It was an art festival, and also was closing. Rosa Quinen, she was the closing piece.
They were not like audience from the community. It was just like
This was downtown
festival. Okay.
Guatemala.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I mean, crowds, right? You stand around, and
Yeah.
crowds starts forming, right? Like that's just
Yeah.
dynamics. So like, ooh, what's happening? And then I think you saw that some people kind of left the circle because they're like, there's nothing happening. Some woman just blowing the whistle, right? Well, other people are. But I think so it was just whoever was on the street, and you see there's all kinds of people. There's like a tourist, there's some Maya women, there's some people that probably, or some kids coming from school just hanging out, and they just kind of gathered around. I think in general art tends to be very elitist, and so it's hard for people to feel welcome to participate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is, I think that's why there's that reticence too, to not participate. For the folks I worked with, a lot of their art, it's actually really interesting. For Fer and Angel, they always show for work. They've shown everywhere in the world. Reina Sofia has pieces of theirs that they've been ever. But they always feel like they're showing what they hate as well, right? And the community members come and they're always really happy because it speaks to them. So while they're not making the art, they feel like they belongs to them. And maybe this is where I talk about this piece, because I really want to talk about it. So this is called an Encitio, and this is a wonderful story. This is Fernando Poyon. He loves maps. He loves cutting up maps and playing with them on puzzles and like making other maps and just like moving things around, and then Vietnam ends up over there and Guatemala over here. Like he just plays with. That's his thing. He loves to do that. And he was telling me he had been looking for a large rock for a long time. on the way to Xinche, which is one of the very important Kachika capitals, he found this rock and he was like, I don't know. And so he got 5 or 6 men with a pickup truck and he went and picked up this rock. Then he called around and found a printing studio and he said, hey, can you please print a rock? And they're like, yeah, bring it over. So he went to Guatemala City, which is not close, took his rock and they looked at the rock and they're like, yeah, no, okay. So he found another place and they're like, yeah, okay, give us the file. And he took the file and they printed the rock. And I'm like, dude, this is awesome. He's like, yeah. Like, have you shown it? He's like, no, Reina Sofia wanted to buy it, but I'm not selling it. I'm like, why would you sell it? He's like, I'm gonna give you a ton of money. He's like, because this belongs to my community. You know, Mayas used to make stela, right? Like they used to carve these stones. Like, I'm just a present day Maya making my own stela with laser printing. I don't get to sell this. Some things need to stay here. I'm like, so where is it? He's like, oh, it's at home. I'm in the yard. So that's, and it weighs, I don't know how much it weighs, but it took 6 men to kill. Right? But it's that notion that some art is for the community and no one else needs to see it, right? I mean, he's gonna picture because and I mean, Reina Sofia wanted, right? And it's like the discussion we were having before with Christian and Miroslava, like this like British Museum stealing things, right? No, you don't need to have my work. You can have other work that I'm making for you. This one stays in, you know, and people visit it if they want to see it, they visit it. And I think it's such an amazing like act of sovereignty and like, you know, and that connection again goes back to that long historical memory to the Mayas being passed with the stelas, which is it's so cool. He's a contemporary Maya. And yeah, and that's and I always have a huge problem when because critics have called this conceptual art. And it's Maya art. They've been making it for a long time. Obviously, he's making connections to, you know, this is not. They work with concepts and they do really interesting things with objects, but it's not the same thing that started, you know, it's not like the urinal, right? Which is, you know, or the this is not a pipe, you know, very cool, but it's not.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause. I think someone will be around for ask questions, but thank you everyone for coming. Remember again, March 11th, Abelardo de la Cruz, now anthropologist, and online April 8th. We'll send out links eventually. Poe Degmacoy and Martin Polanme.
March 11th at Dwell.
Yeah, we'll send out flyers and however you got the message.
Thank you.